Let's now use the map and the for each methods to compute usernames for each account owner in our application. So we have these 4 accounts, and for each of them we want to basically compute a username. And the username is simply the initials of each of the users. Okay, so let's just start with one of them, just with one string to make it really easy, and then we will generalize that function for the entire accounts array that we have down here, so which contains all of the accounts. But for now, I will just grab this string here and create a username for this one. So let's do that down here after this first function that we created. And for now, we will do this outside of a function just to see how it works. And then afterwards, we will create a new function. So let's say the user is this one here, and we want to compute the username. So for this one here, the username should be STW. So that's just the initials in lowercase. And so let's do that. So we start by transforming this string to a lowercase. So we already know how to do that. And now we simply want to take the first letter of each of the words. All right. And so we need to basically split up this string into the multiple words. So this is a very common use case for the split method. So dividing by spaces, which will divide the string into words. And let's just take a look at what we have now so that we can discuss our next move here. So username, and so right now we have Stephen, Thomas, and Williams. And so how do we take each of the first letters here? Well, we could simply loop over the array and then take the first letter in each iteration and add them into a new array. And then in the end, we would join that array and we would end up with just a string of STW. Okay, so let's do what I just said. So looping over this array, taking the first letter and then putting it into a new array. And that is exactly what the map method does, right? Now we can do that directly here because this split method here returns an array. And we can then call the map method on that resulting array. So we can immediately do .map here, just like we can call the split method on the result of the toLowercase method, because this one here returns a string and split is available on all strings. Okay, so let's define our callback function here. And I will start by doing it with a regular function. And so here, let's say we get a word or a name. It doesn't really matter here. And so in each iteration, what we want to do is simply to return the first letter. So that's name at position 0, right? And so right now, this should be an array with only these 3 initials. So let's see. And yes, beautiful. That worked just fine. And so the result of this here, of this whole thing, is now an array. And on an array, we can call the join method. So .join, and simply by an empty string, and this will give us the final result of STW. All right, great. Now let's simplify this callback function here. And again, I will start by deleting the function keyword. Then we can also delete the curly braces. And finally, also delete the return. And so see how simple this has become now. So we transform name to name at the first position. So just the first character. And one more time, don't forget that this is actively returning here. We just don't see it. Okay, but the return is happening. And this is the reason why this works. Because the callback function in the map method always needs to return the new value that should be in the new array. All right, so this works great with this username. Let's now take this actually into a function. So I'm cutting it here. And let's say create usernames. Create a function, add this here. And for now, let's say we get the user in here. And so now we can call the function with this string. Oh, and here I called console.log instead of create username. Okay. And yeah, if we want to see the result, we would also have to log it to the console now. So of course, first returning the username and then log it to the console here as well. And so indeed, we now get the same initial that we had before. But now we actually want to compute one username for each of the account holders in our accounts array. All right. So to do that, should we use the map or the for each method? Well, we do not want to create a new array in this situation. All we want to do is to modify the objects, so the elements that already exist in the accounts array. So in this array here, right? And so what we want is to simply loop over this array here and then do something. And so for that, we use for each. All right. So let's modify this function here some more. And instead of simply receiving one user, what we want to do is to receive all the accounts. So basically an array of accounts. And this goes back to the philosophy I explained to you in the last lecture, which is that each function should actually receive the data that it should work with instead of using a global variable. So that's exactly what we did here with the movements, which we could have read directly from the global variable of account1.movements, for example. But instead, we created a function that receives that data and can then work with that data or with any other data that we choose to pass into it. And so here we are doing the same. We do not want to rely on the accounts array that we already have, but instead we want to pass it into the function. Let's get rid of all of this. And so what I mean is to actually pass the accounts array in here. And here it doesn't have to be called accounts. Let's just call it like this as an abbreviation. Okay, just to remove a little bit the confusion that you might have. Okay, and now as we were saying, we need to use the for each method here because again, we do not want to create a new array. We simply want to modify basically the array that we get as an input. And this is a really important distinction to keep in mind. So here we are again talking about the side effects that I mentioned in the last video. And in this case, the side effects are going to be to change, so to mutate the original accounts array. And so that's what we want to do here. And so for each is the way to go. So for each account in the accounts array, so I'm just calling this ACC, which is again an abbreviation for one single account. So for each account, we now want to do this here basically. So let's grab all this. We can remove this. And so let's create a new property on each of the account objects. So account.username, and that will be equal to user.owner, owner. And so let's check out why that is. So each of these accounts has the owner property. And so that's where the name of the owner, so of the user, comes from. So we take that, so account.owner, and create our username from that. Okay, so that's what we do here. And then we create a new property on that account element. And yeah, and that will then contain the username that we create here. Okay, here we have some kind of error, and of course it's not user, it is account.owner. And now that's it, right? And in this function, we do not return anything because, again, what we're doing here is to produce a side effect. So we are doing something to this account object here, and so there's no need to return anything. We are just doing some work here, basically. We are not creating a new value to return. Okay? Now, if we want to see if this actually worked, we can log this accounts object or this accounts array to the console. And so in there, we should now see our objects with a new property. And indeed, we get the username of JS. And this one should be JD. And here our Stephen Thomas Williams. And indeed, it is the STW that we had previously worked with. Okay? So in this lecture, it was very important to understand the use case for the map method here, which was perfect because it allowed us to create a new simple array which only contains the initials of whatever name it is used on. And then, on the other hand, the for each method was a great use case to produce some so-called side effects. So in other words, to simply do some work without returning anything. And so that's what we did here. We simply looped over the accounts array, and in each iteration, we manipulated the current account object and added a username to it based on the account owner, plus all of these transformations that we had already done before. So a couple of interesting and important takeaways from this video. So make sure to review it properly, and then let's move on to our next transforming method, which is the filter method.